I've been using the Lumix G9M2 as my daily driver for several weeks now, in the hopes of seeing if this will be my next camera. So I've taken it through a whole variety of tests using all different circumstances, different types of photography, to see if this camera will be my next camera. And the conclusion I've come to is that it's an excellent camera for certain people. Let me show you what I mean. For transparency, Lumix have lent me this camera to review, but they have had no input in what I say. They won't see this review before it goes live, and you should be aware that I asked to review this camera so that I can decide if I'm going to buy it with my own money as my next camera. All the pictures in this video are ones I've taken myself with the Lumix G9M2, unless stated otherwise. Let's get into it. Now, one thing you should know about my reviews is that I don't care about numbers, I care about results. And this camera has a lot of impressive numbers, but what results did I get? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. So let's talk image quality. The role that your camera plays in getting a good photo is actually quite a small one. A good photo is made up of much more than the camera you use. However, the part it does play is rather important, because a good picture is made up of all sorts of different ingredients, and those ingredients need to be good, which means that image quality is vitally important when considering what camera you want to get. What's the image quality like on this? Well, quite frankly, it's nothing short of excellent. I really am thoroughly impressed by this little micro four thirds sensor. I've never had an issue with going home with a photo and thinking this isn't good enough to work with. Every photo I've taken, the raw file is an absolute joy to work with. There's plenty of dynamic range, there's good colour replication, there's plenty of stretch in it, if you know what I mean. You can adjust it any way you want depending on your sort of editing style. And that really shouldn't be surprising, because being one of the major manufacturers, they know what they're doing when they're building their sensors now. I've worked with Lumix cameras before, and honestly, image quality has never been a problem for them. And this is no exception. Now, another thing I particularly like about this camera, and one of the main reasons I considered it, is its reliability. Now, this is weather sealed, it's got dual memory card slots, so you're not worried about losing any of your pictures. I can take it out in all sorts of conditions. Today, for example, where we've just got constant drizzle, where all my equipment is going to get absolutely soaked. Even though it's not heavy rain, it's consistent rain. And anybody who's taken a camera out that isn't weather sealed in this sort of weather knows just how nervous that makes you. Whereas I know I can completely rely on this. I've had my Lumix S5, which I'm filming on now, for a long time, and I've taken it out in all sorts of conditions, and the weather sealing has never let me down once. This is the exact same body as my Lumix S5, so I've got absolute confidence that I can take this out in all sorts of conditions. Now, as an outdoor photographer and an adventure photographer, that's an invaluable feature that I need in my camera. And as I said, the dual card slots are also a feature that I can't live without now. I have had cards fail on me in recent times, and as a result I've lost pictures and whole shoots have gone wrong because of it. So it was an absolute must that I had a camera with dual card slots so I could have a backup save of those photos. Both card slots can shoot very fast, which is important because the speed of this camera is incredible. In an electronic shutter mode, it can shoot up to 60 frames per second. So if you're a photographer who values fast photography, then for this price point, this is up there as one of the best value cameras for a fast shutter speed. So one concern many of you will have with this being a micro four thirds sensor is its low light performance. Now, as you've seen, it is a grey, rainy day, still early in the morning, before 8 o'clock. In here, we're under quite a thick canopy of trees. Now, there's a photo here that's not very good. It does demonstrate this point well. We've got this old sort of wooden trailer thing, and it's very dark, very low light. In order to get a decent exposure handheld, I need to get it at ISO 1600. Now, one thing you will find with micro four thirds sensors, unless you have a very bright aperture on a prime lens, is that you will have to bump that ISO on occasion. I found though that the images on this aren't horribly noisy. There's not a lot of digital noise, there is some grain, but I don't think it's particularly ugly. It's very popular to put grain on photos on purpose these days, but if you like a clean look in your photo, that's still very achievable. With selective use of noise reduction, I think the images from this are still very good, even in low light conditions like this. Now, it's not very often that you will have to take low light photos like this, but if you do, then you can be confident that, well, in my opinion, bumping those ISOs up doesn't destroy the image quality like it used to on older micro four thirds cameras. Okay, so let's talk about the autofocus now. Now, I'm actually filming on the G9 now as a sort of demonstration of this because it's easier to demonstrate like this than with photos. I've also got some photo examples I want to show you when I talk about this. So if you haven't heard by now, Lumix have completely overhauled their autofocusing system in their more modern cameras. They've gone from contrast detect over to phase detect, which people have been asking for a long time, because although the contrast detect worked well in certain situations, in a lot of situations it wasn't reliable. I've experienced that because I've got an older S5 one, and the autofocus has let me down on occasion. Whereas with this now, the autofocus is a lot quicker. You can hide yourself, come back really quickly, do it again, come back really quickly, pulls focus quick, pulls focus quick again. It really is very reliable, even in this sort of low light situation and low contrast as well. I've switched over to the V-Log profile, so there's very little contrast between me and the background. There's lots of messy branches behind me, so I could very easily get lost. But as you can see, it's locked onto me and got me really well. So the human autofocus works fantastic. I've not had an issue with it at all for taking pictures of people or for video. It's been really good. But a lot of people, we wanted to use this camera for wildlife photography. So how does the animal auto detect work on this camera? So, wildlife photography. In all honesty, this camera has given me the confidence to have a good go at wildlife photography. I've never really had the focal length. Look at that. So that might not look like a very, very long lens. I mean, it looks pretty big next to my head. And that is 400mm of focal length, which, because Micro Four Thirds doubles the focal length, means that you actually get 800mm of focal length out of this lens. Now, this is the Leica 100-400. And Lumix sent it to me with this, which I'm very glad they did, because it meant I actually got to give it a good go. I wanted to try wildlife photography with this. This lens is great to use, and in combination with this camera, I've managed to get some really good shots. Now, I would have loved some more opportunities to get some nicer conditions to do wildlife photography, but I just haven't had the opportunity, and I was hoping today I could get some great ones along this water. But alas, there are no birds. I mean, this is a protected area with the RSPB, the sort of the British Bird Trust thing. This area is like encouraged to have wild birds, but today they've all disappeared. Either that or they can just hear me talking really loudly to a camera. Maybe it is that actually. But the times I have been able to do wildlife photography with this, I've been very impressed both with the image quality, the stabilisation and the autofocus. Now, the autofocus isn't infallible. There have been occasions where it has missed focus or not quite acquired focus. It says it's locked, but then it's just out of focus. There was a particular occasion where a deer was running away from me. It locked on initially, but then as you got further and further away, it lost focus. Now, admittedly, because he was facing away, the algorithms probably couldn't quite work it out with the algorithms within the camera. So I'm willing to let that go. There was another occasion where I was photographing a horse and it locked onto its rear end with eye detect focus. I won't talk too much about that one. But if you want to photograph birds, it picks them out really well, even within branches. I've managed to get some great photos with it. Once it's locked on focus, it can keep them within the frame and generally keeps them very sharp. Now, what I tend to do was burst shoot the photos so that it kept locking and relocking, because if the bird moved too much and it didn't really stand out against the background, then it did sort of lose focus a little bit. But that's understandable with autofocus systems, and it's produced some very sharp photos for me. Okay, let's talk about the battery life. I personally haven't had a problem with it. It's lasted me as long as any shoot that I've done, but I don't go out shooting for very long. I don't spend all day doing photographs. I just do sort of golden hour or the couple of hours that I've got in the day. If you're going out all day, then you'll probably need more than one battery. But for me personally, and I suspect for most people, one battery will last you a good photo session. If you're doing sort of more than 4 hours of photography, then yeah, take another battery with you. But less than that, it should last you, unless you're constantly using the faster shutter speeds or the mechanical shutter constantly. If you're getting lots and lots of photographs, then it will die on you. But personally, I've not had a problem with it. I am quite selective in the photos I take though. I always turn the camera off when I'm not using it. I don't just leave it idling. And I have to really think that the photo's going to be good to take it. My own experience has been that the battery life is good, but I have heard other reports that people haven't found it as good. So it really does depend on your situation. My recommendation would be to get a spare battery just in case. That way you know that you're not going to have a dead camera that you can't use when you get some fantastic opportunities for photos. Right, let's talk image stabilization. And you'll be unsurprised to hear that Panasonic have done an excellent job of stabilising this little sensor. Lumix have always had a very good reputation for stabilising their lenses, and this is no exception. I haven't felt the need to use a tripod once with this, even in pretty low light conditions. Now, if you want to do long exposure photography or use very long focal lengths, then you may need to use a tripod, but honestly, I haven't had to once. It's been excellent. If you're photographing fast-moving subjects or you just hate tripods, then this should be a serious consideration because yeah, you don't need a tripod. So as you can see, I'm going for a very simple vertical shot here. I've got this tree branch here reaching out over the top of this water tower. Now, because this is a micro four thirds sensor, I'm confident in the hyperfocal distance. I know that from front to back, it's going to be sharp at f11. I don't need to focus stack it because that is just the beauty of a micro four thirds sensor. Hi, I'm not a fan of the drowned rat look, so I decided I was going to give up there and finish this off at home because there's some things you really need to know about the Lumix G9M2 before you decide if you want to buy it or not. There are a couple more positives I want to bring out first before we move on to some of the stuff you should be aware of if you're going to go for this camera. Now let's talk about the handling and the body of this camera. I absolutely love it. I knew I was going to though because it's the exact same body as my filming camera, the Lumix S5, and I love that camera body as well. Just the ergonomics of it, the placement of the buttons, how it feels to hold. I have large hands. I'm 6'3". I'm not a small guy, and as a result, small cameras do not suit me. So I'm really glad that even though this is a micro four thirds camera, it's got a full frame body. Some people complain about that. I don't really get it. It doesn't weigh much more than other micro four third bodies. It's just a little bigger to hold, and as a result, I think it makes a much better camera to hold. Small cameras are great for putting in your pocket, not so great to hold. So that's one thing I really wanted to bring out, that Lumix, you've done a very good job of this camera body. Don't change it. Secondly, the EVF on this camera is really good in my opinion. Some people have complained that it's not as good as a competition, but I think they're nitpicking. I never once found that I didn't want to look through the EVF to find my composition. I found it bright, I found it active, being able to see like the eye autofocus and all that sort of stuff work on the EVF was absolutely fantastic. It's better than the one that on their previous generation cameras. As a result, I think it actually helped me to gain a few great photos simply because it had such a good EVF. And now let's talk about some of the features that I particularly made use of and got results from with this camera. Now, it's got a lot of features that I will never use, like live composite, for example. You can sort of do long exposure photography, that sort of stuff, at night photography. That's not really my style. A couple of things I did make good use of were the super resolution. Now that was great for certain situations. You can take shots with this and it shifts the pixels slightly so that even though it's a 25 megapixel sensor, you can take 100 megapixel photos. I use this a few times and the images look really good. They're really sharp, really clear, really crisp, and there's loads of data there, so you could print absolutely huge with them if you wanted to. There are certain limitations with this mode though, obviously. At low shutter speeds it's very difficult to do. You'll definitely need a tripod to do it, but most of the time it worked great for me, and as a result I've got some very big files that I can use down the line if I want to. Another feature that I use that I quite like, with this being a photography-centric camera, they've put some JPEG profiles in, so sort of like film emulation, if you like to think of it like that. One of which is a Leica one, a black and white Leica one. It comes built in, baked into the body sort of thing, and I use that a lot. Now, I photograph quite a lot in flat light because of where I live. We get a lot of flat light in this country. That's not a complaint, it's just a reality. And as a result, I like to use black and white profiles, so to sort of simplify my composition a bit more, makes it much easier to take a good photo in flat light if you use a black and white profile. And that profile looks really good. It's not just a standard black and white profile, it's an emulation of a Leica camera. Now, you can save both the JPEG and the RAW, which I did all the time, and generally I edited the RAW into black and white to look similar to the JPEG. But having that JPEG and having it on the rear LCD screen meant that I could see those compositions really well, so that got used a lot. And one more thing that I want to say as a positive is something that's true of all Micro Four Thirds cameras, not just the Lumix G9M2, is that they're very lightweight to carry. The body isn't lightweight, but the lenses are absolutely tiny, And that's where a lot of the weight comes from in photography. If you're a landscape photographer, you can carry upwards of 3 lenses if you want all your focal ranges. And if you're going with a full frame setup, that's a lot of weight to carry around. Whereas if you go with much smaller lenses like this, you can make a huge weight saving. So if you're climbing mountains like I do, or hiking long distances, then having that lightweight setup, every gram matters, and you save a lot of weight by going with Micro Four Thirds. One of the main reasons to get it, in my opinion. That and the fast readout speed of the sensor. But that leads me on to some of the bad points. So of course, with wildlife photography, one of the things we need to talk about is rolling shutter. Now, it's not bad on this camera by any means, but it's not perfect either. This has a very fast readout speed because it's a small sensor. It can afford to do that. But even still, if you have a fast moving subject or you're panning and you're using the electronic shutter, you will get rolling shutter occasionally. I tended to resort to using the mechanical shutter because you still get very fast frames per second. And because it's a small mechanical shutter, it's not very noisy. So even if you do use it for wildlife photography, it's very unlikely to spook birds unless they're like right in front of you. And I'm old-fashioned in the sense that I love the sound and the feel of a mechanical shutter. That has absolutely nothing to do with image quality. It's just how it feels to use. And personally, even from using like a DSLR to the more modern cameras, I've always loved the feel of something mechanical inside moving as you take the picture. It makes me feel more connected to the photo rather than just like a flat image that I'm taking on the sensor. Another thing I found I missed quite a bit was lack of depth of field. Now, don't get me wrong, there is still plenty of background blur in certain situations, but if your subject is too close to the background behind it or is too far away, then getting that background blur is very difficult on a Micro Four Thirds sensor. Again, this isn't a problem with Lumix's design on this. This is just a reality that smaller sensor means there is less bokeh in the background. A lot of the time this didn't bother me, but the times it did bother me, it really bothered me, because when you want to really isolate a subject, especially in wildlife photography, then that nice blurry, creamy background can make a massive difference. One way you can overcome this is by artificially doing it with software. I personally am not a fan of this, but I have absolutely no problem with other people using it. For example, on Lightroom, there is the blur feature, and it's getting better and better all the time. I think eventually it'll be very difficult to tell who has used it and who has done it naturally. At the moment, it's still quite obvious when you do use it artificially, but it's only going to get better. So if you're somebody that likes to use that, then you should not so much consider the background blur as a problem. And although this is a photography based review, as a photographer, I am going to talk about the video features in this, because that's becoming a more and more important part of photography and sharing your work to a lot of people. Going forward, it's something you really should start considering if you do want to share your work with people. It's inevitable that you will have to start doing video as well. It's moving towards that direction for most people. Now, it should come as no surprise that the video in this is absolutely great. Lumix have been doing great video cameras for a long time now, and this is no exception. Although this is aimed at photographers, which I'm very happy about, it does still have those great video features, which I'm also very happy about. One of the best things is that it's very easy to switch between the two. So for example, if you're photographing a subject like a bird or some sort of animal, and you're in manual mode, you can just use the shutter to take the pictures. But then right behind the shutter and the adjustment buttons, there is a little red record button there. Can you see? So you could be taking your pictures like away, and then all you have to do to start recording, once you've got your photos that you're happy with, is just press the little red record button, and it'll start recording in the settings that you're using, unless it's slower shutter speeds, in which case you will have to adjust it slightly. But that fact that you can switch so quickly from photography to video is really useful when you're capturing very fast moving scenes, or scenes that are very changeable. Being able to go from one to the other, I think, is really good, and I've used it several times. And the choice of video modes is great. If you don't need super high quality video, you can choose from the lower quality ones, and it saves space on your memory cards, easier to work with on your phone, easier to upload to social media. But it's also got really, really high quality video as well. It's got up to 5.8K. You can record in 60p, slow motion, you name it, you can do it with this camera in terms of video. But I wouldn't recommend buying this for the video if all you care about is video. Lumix have just released the GH7, which is the Micro Four Thirds video equivalent they've made. It's the more video-centric camera. This is aimed at photographers, which is also why I was most curious about trying it, because I really did want to see if this was going to be my next camera. I've been thinking about it a long time, and I'm glad I've been able to test it out. If you want to see a bit more in-depth about the video features in this and in other Lumix cameras, then I highly recommend checking out Ed Prosser's channel. He's an actual working professional when it comes to video, and I've learned a lot from his channel about how I can, do a proper job of making these videos look good, for example, and using the footage that I get in a great way, because I came into this whole YouTube space as a photographer and had to learn the video side of it, and his channel was one of the ones that helped me the most. So I'll put a link to his channel at the end, and definitely check him out if you want to see the video capabilities of a variety of Lumix cameras and other cameras as well. So the camera that had those great numbers on paper, what results did it get me? Well, to be honest, I've got some of my best photos with this camera. I happened to be in the right place at the right time on a number of occasions, and this is the camera that I was using, and it did not let me down. I never once felt that this camera held me back in getting great photos, and some of them have even made it into my permanent portfolio. And that shouldn't be a surprise. This is a great little camera. Should you buy it? Well, anybody that tells you what camera to buy is probably trying to sell it to you. I'm not going to tell you whether you should buy this or not. You should take what I've said today and what I've said in my previous videos as I've used this, and make your own mind up. Look at other reviewers as well and what they say, and if you can, try it out for yourself first before you put that money down and buy it, because your experience with cameras for everybody is very different. I've expressed my opinion on it. I love it. Your experience may differ. And that's okay. That's why we get this abundance of choice of cameras, because everybody's different and everybody chooses different. I don't think you would be disappointed to buy it though. And one thing I can answer is, will this be my next camera? Because that's why I borrowed this, because I wanted to test it out. Well, the answer to that question is, my heart says yes, but my mind says no. Don't get me wrong, this has been a great camera to use. I would be happy to call it my camera, but I don't need this camera. Micro Four Thirds has some very distinct advantages that I simply don't need in the style of photography that I do, and I've come to realise that as I've used this camera. This is overkill for what I need. There are a couple of choices that make a bit more sense for me to go with than this. So, although I love this camera, it won't be the one I buy. If you do want to see what I'm going to go with, then tune in next week, because my new camera is arriving in about half an hour, according to the delivery service that I got, which probably means I'm going to have to wait in for another 4 hours before they actually knock on the door. But it's on its way. So if you want to see that, then stay tuned. And thank you, Lumix, for lending me this camera. It's been a great camera. I'll see you next time.